I'd just like to know kind of what's sort of at the top of your list, from a PEI perspective, the most obvious impacts and dangers of climate change that we're seeing on the island right now.
The impacts right now, I like to always focus on the coastal regions because Prince Edward Island is essentially just a large sandbar. It's made up of sand and sandstone, so it's particularly vulnerable to coastal erosion. What with our rising sea levels, the land itself is falling a little bit, but also the seasonality of our sea ice is shifting, where we used to have a long season where the shore was protected by this insulation of sea ice. It's a very short period of time now. And all it takes is one storm. And there's certain places we've witnessed here on the island where a full 5 meters of a property will just completely disappear. So I always focus on coastal erosion as the most prominent impact that we need to learn to adapt to. But it's not the only one. We are challenged by hotter and hotter conditions and drier conditions, especially during particular seasons.
Great. If I can jump in here, I'd be curious to hear what Stephanie has to say too, but something I think about for PEI is that it is probably the most vulnerable province to climate change. And it therefore needs to be pressuring especially during a federal election, the elected officials need to be pressuring the federal government to take action on climate change so that it is protected as a province. There's a larger global responsibility, especially to the communities that are most vulnerable to climate change, which tend to be low income, communities of color, which are all communities on PEI, but the entire island, like Adam just suggested, is at risk. And so we need to be implementing adaptation, but we also need to be mitigating. And one of the examples I like to give of different measures that do both is investing in energy efficiency. So we all heard about the heartbreaking events this year of the heat dome in BC, right? Like almost 600 people died due to heat exhaustion in that heat dome. And if we had taken the measure to change their heat sources over to heat pumps, then they would have had air conditioning, and it's much more likely that they would have survived. And that's a mitigation and adaptation impact. So our built environment plays a huge role in mitigating the climate crisis, but also helping us adapt to it. And PEI, I really feel that in this election, depending on who gets elected, we have an opportunity to send some truth tellers from PEI to the House of Commons who will speak up about the risks that PEI is in right now. And I would highlight one of our endorsed candidates, Anna Keenan for the Green Party in Malpeque. You asked earlier about the different parties and their platforms. And of the 4 parties, there's something I would highlight in each of the platforms that we want to lift up. But I think the Green Party is the only party that's actually telling the truth about the severity of the crisis that we're in.
I'll maybe sort of, Stephanie, did you have anything to sort of add, I guess, to the subject of impacts observed in PEI?
Maybe I'll just add that I think in the coming years, there's a few areas where I see the resilience of certain systems will be tested. I think agriculture and aquaculture will certainly be among the top, as well as just our biodiversity and, ecosystem services. I think their resilience will be tested. But the one thing that we probably don't talk about as much, or I think our social fabric will also be tested. With climate change, it's not just the physical impacts on, wildlife and birds and animals and plants, it's also on people. And I think our social fabric is fragile. I think the pandemic has shown that in many communities. The resilience has been tested and it's probably at the breaking point if it hasn't broken. Climate change will make that, will basically push the pressure further. And I think we need to start talking more about how our social systems and climate change interact.